Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. In this video, I'm going to be covering imaginary numbers and all of the questions dealing with imaginary numbers that you might encounter on the SAT. Let's get into it. So the first thing we need to discuss is what exactly are imaginary numbers. So you might recall that in math we have real numbers, which are basically just numbers that exist. 1, 2, 3, 0, square root of 2, -5, 1,467,874, pi. They all exist. An imaginary number is essentially a number that does not exist. That was a mouthful. An imaginary number is essentially a number that does not exist. There we go. So for example, the square root of a negative number, right? You can't take the square root of, say, -4. At least not with real numbers. You can if you're using imaginary numbers. What is the real world like use of imaginary numbers? I have no idea, but I will show you how they appear on the SAT. First thing, let's go over it real quick. Whenever you see this in the SAT, in the question, they'll always tell you, in the question, they will define for you that I is equal to the square root of -1. The first thing I'm going to tell you is whenever you see an I by itself, never replace it with the square root of -1. I know your instincts tell you to do this. Like if the question were to say x equals -1. So what do? In the question, you probably, and anywhere you see an x, you're going to replace it with a -1. Woo! You don't do this with the i's. The reason is they have to specify the I as square root of -1, because if they don't, you can pretend that it's just a variable, and then at the end of the question, you'll be like, well, there's technically no correct answer because I is a variable, I win. No, that's why they define it for you. So when you see i's by itself, for example, if you see like a 5i, do not rewrite this as 5 times the square root of -1. Don't do this. Got it? Don't do that. Now, if you see an I squared or I raised to some power, you can do this. So for example, if I is the square root of -1, that means if you have I squared, this is going to be equal to -1. Cool. Let's go over the pattern. I's are actually very simple. Many people haven't seen them before, but they're very simple because they just have, it's a very small subset like of information that you need to know, and it's kind of just like repetitive, like everything in the SAT. So let's go over this. So I to the first power is just I, because anything to the first power is just itself. I squared, as we went over, is equal to -1. I to the third, think of it this way. I to the third is simply I to the first power times I to the second power, right? I to the first power is just I. I to the second power is -1, so this gets you -I. So I to the third power is -I. I to the fourth power is just I squared times I squared. So this gets us -1 times -1, which becomes +1. So this is the pattern. I to the first power is I squared is -1, I to the third power is -I to the fourth is 1. And the beauty is that this pattern repeats over and over and over again. So, like, I to the fifth power is just I to the sixth power is just -1. I to the seventh power is just -I. I to the eighth power is just 1. It just keeps repeating over and over and over again. A common mistake that people make with this is they'll understand that like I to the fourth is the same as I to the eighth, is the same as I to the 12th, is the same as I to the 16th. So the four, like every 4 is always the same, and they'll sometimes say, oh, well then maybe every third is the same. Like I to the third is -I, so I to the 6th is -I, and I to the 9th is -I. This is not the case. Don't make that mistake, okay? The way you get I to any power is you have to find the closest multiple of 4 and adjust from there. Now, if you need to pause the video and review your I's, go for it, no big deal. And I'm going to keep going forward to show you kind of what I mean. So the SAT might ask you a question like, what is I to the 24th power? And you don't really want to write out all the 24 terms, right? That's no fun. It's going to be horrible. So you need to find the closest multiple of 4 to 24. It so happens to be that 24 is a multiple of 4, which means that I to the 24th power is simply going to be 1. So that one was easy. What if instead I ask you, what is I to the 99th power? Let's start by finding the number that's a multiple of 4 that's closest to 99. The number that comes to my brain is 100. So we know that I to the 100th power is going to be 1. That means that I to the 99th power is just the one that came before it in the pattern, which was negative I. What if we have I to the 51st power? So the closest multiple of 4 that I'm thinking of is I to the 48th. So that's going to be 1, right? That means I to the 49th is going to be I to the 50th is going to be negative 1. So I to the 51st is going to be negative I. You can do this for everything. You just need to remember those first 4 patterns. Then you need to remember that you have to find the closest multiple of 4 to what I to the whatever power you're looking for, and then just adjust from there. And that's it. Literally, like, for this kind of a topic, like, that's it. So with one of those 2 main types of I questions that they might ask you will just be I raised to some power, and that's how you do it. The other kind of question that they might ask you is something like this. They'll tell you that, for example, something like 2 plus 3i over 1 minus I. They'll tell you that this can be written in the form a plus bi. In other words, that this can be written in the form that you have a real number, some real number, plus an imaginary number. Then they're going to ask you which of the following choices is this equivalent to? They might rephrase it slightly differently, but this is basically what it's going to be. They're going to give you an equation like this with i's and real numbers. So i's, imaginary numbers and real numbers. They're going to say it can be written in a form of a real number plus an imaginary number, and they're going to ask you this is equal to which of the following. I'm going to now show you how to do this, and it's just the same thing every time. Here's how you do it. What you have to do is you have to multiply the top and bottom by what is called the conjugate. The conjugate is simply whatever is in the denominator, but with the opposite, like, arithmetic sign. So in this case, we have a 1 minus I, so the conjugate is 1 plus I. Make sense? And it's always that. If instead on the bottom we had 3i plus 4, the conjugate would be 3i minus 4. So we're going to do that. So let's do it. So we got 2 plus 3i over 1 minus I. And you're going to see why we have to multiply it by the conjugate. Because if we multiply the top and bottom by 1 minus I, the issue is we never really get it into that a plus bi form. When we multiply it by the conjugate, it ends up getting us to that form. So we're just going to multiply now the top and bottom by 1 plus I. And this will get us 2. So just going to FOIL it out. And at this point, just FOIL it out. Don't replace any I squared with anything. Just pretend this is next and just FOIL the mother clucker out. So we're going to get 2 plus 2i plus 3i plus 3i squared. just foiling it out. On the bottom, we're going to get 1 plus I minus I squared. Now we combine like terms. This becomes 2 plus 5I plus 3I squared over 1 minus I squared. Now at this point, remember, I squared is equivalent to -1. The i's we just leave by themselves. Never bloody replace them with a square root of -1. So this gets us 2 plus 5I plus 3 times -1 over 1 minus -1. So this becomes 2 plus 5I minus 3. 2 plus 5I minus 3 over 1 minus -1, so 2. So this becomes -1 plus 5I all over 2. So our answer is going to be, if it's written in that a plus bi form, that means we have the real number by itself with the imaginary number by itself, is going to be -1/2 plus 5I over 2. If you need to pause the video at this point, review everything we just did, please do it. And that's it. Just multiply the top and bottom by the conjugate to get to where we needed to go. Let me do one more, just to make it clear. Let's see, these were plus and minus. Let's do, I don't know, let's do plus and plus. So let's say instead we've got 3 minus 2I over, let's say 4 plus 3I. The first, and the question is the same, which of the following is it equivalent to? It's in the form a plus bi. We're going to do the same thing. Multiply the top and bottom by the conjugate. On the bottom we got 4 plus 3i, so we're going to multiply by 4 minus 3i. So we're going to multiply this by 4 minus 3i over 4 minus 3i. And this becomes, let's just FOIL out the top, 12 minus 9i minus 8i plus 6i squared all over, let me put parentheses here, all over 12 minus 9i squared. You might be able to see the pattern. If we have like a 4 plus 3i times a 4 minus 3i, the middle terms just get canceled out. Cool, so that's why I skipped that step. So this becomes 12 minus 17i plus 6i squared all over 12 minus 9i squared. Let's keep going. This becomes 12 minus 17i, this is 17, yeah, plus 6 times -1 all over 12 minus 9 times -1. So this becomes 12 minus 12i minus 6 all over 12 plus 9, so 21. So this becomes 6 minus 12i over 21. So our answer is going to be 6 over 21 minus 12i over 21. And sometimes something will be more simplified, like we know like a 3 goes into both parts. It depends what's in the answer choice. If the answer choices are more simplified, simplify your answer. If they're not, you don't have to. But this is basically all that you really see with regards to i's. You might actually see one more thing. Just remember this part. Rare, but technically you should know it. Remember that anything to the 0 power is equal to 1. Doesn't matter what it is. So if you see something like I to the 0 power, same thing applies. This is going to be equal to 1. The things we just did up to this point, those are what you see all the time. This, I think I've seen one question out on one test, so I just want to make sure I briefly covered it in this video. And that's it. Okay, I hope you liked the video. If you did, please hit the like button, the subscribe button, the notification bell, share it, and write in the comments if there's anything that you would like me to cover, and I will see you next time.